Conference Room D. Starting a new job can always be stressful. You know the score when you're coming into a new role in a new company and must figure out the office politics, remember all the names and faces, learn new skills and prove yourself to the boss. It's a challenge, especially when you enter a toxic workplace. I've had a few bad jobs in my time, but office work is rarely a matter of life and death, and nothing can compare to the nightmare I experienced during my brief stint at Delio Incorporated. What can I say about that particular company? On the surface, it's an ordinary and rather mundane business that manufactures household and industrial use cleaning products. The role I was accepted for was quality control manager in their headquarters, a nondescript and unremarkable office located in the central business district. It had been 3 months since I was laid off from my last gig. Bills were building up. My credit cards were maxed out and my rent was overdue. Therefore, I was happy to receive the job offer. That's not to say I didn't do my due diligence on the company, making inquiries online and through recruiters. I have to admit there were some red flags raised. People I spoke with didn't recommend Delio Incorporated as a good place to work. There was nothing specific I could get information on, no lawsuits or harassment allegations. However, there were dark rumors about the company, and specifically, the head office where I would be based. Again, there was nothing concrete, only talk of a bad vibe about the place along with a high staff turnover rate. Honestly, I did have some reservations, but frankly, I was also desperate, so I decided to take the job and make the best of it. This, of course, turned out to be a mistake, but hindsight is 20/20. Still, my first couple of weeks in post went surprisingly well. My colleagues were decent folk for the most part. Mr. Hill was the CEO and my direct line manager. He wasn't the worst boss I've had, not by a long shot. I didn't work there long enough to know him well, but Mr. Hill struck me as a fair man, a tough taskmaster with a no-nonsense approach, but a boss who treated his employees with respect. I can't help but feel sympathy for Hill, especially given the dark secrets he's carried on his shoulders for so many years. John, a middle-aged mother of 2, was the office manager. She was competent and efficient, but prone to being overdramatic. Then there was Rachel, the perky and attractive receptionist with long, dark hair, sparkling brown eyes, and sultry good looks. She was flirty and fun, and I'll admit to developing a crush on her. The final character in my sad little story was Carl, a cocky sales rep with the kind of good looks and arrogant confidence you'd expect from someone in his line of work. I liked Carl for the most part, but saw him as a potential rival for Rachel's affections. I think I got the lay of the land pretty quickly, but it became clear there was a dark shadow hanging over that office, and this was all down to Conference Room D. As its name suggests, Room D was one of the 4 conference rooms located in the head office. Conference Room D was indeed unique because it was located in an annex that otherwise seemed abandoned. None of the office staff had desks in the annex, and the lights and radiators were always switched off. This struck me as odd, but honestly, I didn't give the matter much thought, as I reckoned they just used the annex for storage or something. This was until I tried to book Room D and received a sharp rebuke from the powers that be. I wanted to arrange a meeting with the department heads so I could hash out a strategy going forward. There was only one time that suited all attendees. Unfortunately, rooms A through C were all booked out for client meetings. Naturally, I thought I could use Room D, which was just sitting there empty. So I tried to make a booking through the portal, only to find that Conference Room D was blocked out indefinitely. This was a mild annoyance, but I wanted to keep the meeting time, and so the next port of call was Jean, the office manager. I went to her room on Wednesday morning, not realizing the storm I was about to cause. Jean was sitting in her office, a look of concentration on her makeup-covered face as she frowned under her beehive haircut. Pictures of her family were carefully laid out on the desk, and Jean smiled amicably and invited me inside when I knocked on her door. "Come in, Daniel, and please take a seat," she said, continuing to smile as she addressed me by my first name. "Now then," Jean continued after I was seated, "how are you getting on, Daniel? Is everyone treating you okay?" "Yes," I replied with a nod. "I'm finding my feet and everyone's been very welcoming." "Oh, good," Jean replied as her grin widened. "That's what I like to hear. We consider ourselves one big happy family here at DeLeo, and I know Mr. Hill really wants you to feel like part of the team. Now, what is it I can do for you today? Well, John, it's about the meeting I'm trying to set up. I'm having trouble organizing a venue. I was planning to use conference room D, but noticed it's block booked, so I was hoping you could work your magic and get it opened up for me. Up until that point, we'd been having a pleasant conversation, but the atmosphere inside the room changed in an instant following my request. The smile suddenly disappeared from Jean's face, her expression changing to what I can only describe as a mixture of disgust and fear. Her voice became stern and agitated as she spluttered out her uncompromising reply. No. Absolutely not. Room D is not available for booking at any time. This is simply out of the question. I was taken aback by Jean's heavy-handed response, but I thought I could talk her around and save the situation. I'm sorry, Jean. I didn't mean to rock the boat. If room D is used for storage, I don't mind moving a few boxes and tidying up the place. Unfortunately, my attempt to calm the office manager backfired as Jean stood up from her desk, pointing a finger at my face and shouting with unnecessary aggression. No, Daniel, this is not going to happen. You must leave my office immediately. I got up from my chair, raising my hands defensively and backing out of the room without saying another word, as Jean continued to glare at me from behind her desk. Needless to say, I was rather shaken by the encounter with DeLeo's office manager. But this wasn't the end of the matter. That afternoon, I was called into a meeting with Mr. Hill, the company's CEO. I felt anxious when I entered the boss's office, feeling like I was in trouble, even though I didn't really understand what I'd done wrong. I found the boss sitting behind his large oak desk, appearing calm as he wrote an old-school memo using pen and paper. He glanced up at me as I came in, nodding his bald, dome-shaped head as he silently motioned for me to take a seat. The tension inside that room was palpable, and it didn't help that Mr. Hill kept me waiting before he eventually addressed the issue at hand. Well, Daniel, he eventually said, looking up and meeting my eye with a stern and judgmental gaze. Do you know why I've asked to see you today? I struggled to answer through my dry throat, but ultimately found the words. Honestly, Mr. Hill, I'm not entirely sure. My boss tutted dismissively and shook his head. Let me be frank, Daniel. I took a chance in hiring you. We're a close-knit team here at DeLeo Incorporated, and bringing outsiders in is always a risk. Still, I saw something in you. I thought you could make a valuable contribution to our business, and I still believe so, Daniel. He paused momentarily, looking me directly in the eye before continuing. I don't want to hear anything more about Conference Room D. It's a no-go area, and for good reasons that do not concern you. Don't jeopardize your future here, Daniel. Let this matter drop. Now, am I making myself clear? I was still baffled by this whole debacle, but I didn't want to go against my employer on an issue that seemed so trivial, especially since I was still in my probationary period, and so I nodded my head submissively and said, Yes, sir, Mr. Hill, perfectly clear. Good, he replied with a thin smile. Now please get back to work. With that, I left his office and closed the door behind me. Under normal circumstances, that would have been the end of the matter, but events took an unexpected and disturbing turn. It was the strangest thing, but I couldn't stop thinking about that damned annex and the mysterious conference room. D. For the rest of the afternoon, I found myself staring in the direction of the darkened annex, as something down there was making me feel extremely uneasy. A cold chill ran through me, and yet I couldn't look away. I was glad to leave the office at the end of the day, but had no respite once I returned home. I struggled to sleep that night, and when I did finally drop off, my subconscious was haunted by bizarre and disturbing nightmares. In my dream, I found myself standing in the forbidden annex, freezing and shivering due to an unexplainable cold, as the malfunctioning lights flickered on and off above my head. I wanted to turn back and return to the safe part of the office, but something was forcing me forward, pulling me towards the cursed conference room D. I walked forward towards the door, my hand shaking as I reached out for the handle and slowly opened it. The room was shrouded in darkness, with a dim, flickering light providing the only illumination. but my focus was on the shadowy figure standing at the far side of the room, a faceless entity that lived in the dark. He had no face or eyes that I could see, and yet I knew he was looking directly at me. More than that, actually. This entity was staring directly into my very soul, infiltrating my subconscious and seeing every one of my dark secrets. I felt naked and exposed in front of this monster, and yet I couldn't resist or even flee from his all-powerful dark influence. I tried to scream but couldn't utter a sound. Instead, I was paralyzed, as the shadowy entity used his black magic to slam the door shut behind me, trapping me inside that hellish room where I'd be at his mercy. I went to work on Thursday, but barely made it through the day, as the vivid details of the nightmare remained etched in my mind, and the foreboding threat of Conference Room D hung over me. I tried to tell myself that this was all caused by the stress of my new job and the tense encounter with the boss. I hoped I would enjoy a good night's sleep on Thursday and get back to normal. But of course, this didn't happen. The nightmare was even worse that evening as I was thrust back inside the cursed room with the dark figure standing ominously above me. Once again, I couldn't move or scream as the Shadow Man reached out, surrounding my physical form with his dark power, as every part of my soul was exposed and torn apart. I woke up screaming and drenched in cold sweat, realizing that this was something deeper than workplace stress. I had to drag myself into work on Friday morning. The spooky office was the last place I wanted to be, but I couldn't afford another black mark on my record by taking a sick day. And besides, I wanted answers regarding what was haunting my dreams, and I was sure someone in the office had them. I made it through to Friday lunchtime when I eventually got my opportunity. Entering the break room, I saw Rachel and Carl sitting together, chatting and laughing over their respective meals. Rachel was wearing the cute red top I liked, and when I walked in, she flicked back her hair and smiled sweetly, saying, "Hey newbie, how are you today?" I smiled back at the pretty receptionist, momentarily forgetting about my woes as our eyes met. Carl wasn't quite so welcoming towards me, however. "Geez, man. What happened to you?" he asked, with a raised eyebrow. "You look like hell." I was annoyed by Carl's frankness, but I had to admit he had a point. 2 sleepless nights in a row and a series of vivid nightmares had left me tired and haggard. I was slightly irritated to be shown up in front of Rachel, as I hadn't forgotten my romantic feelings towards her. I couldn't think of a response in that moment, but thankfully, Rachel broke the silence with an invitation. "Grab yourself a strong cup of coffee, Daniel, and come join us." I felt reassured, helping myself to a hot beverage before I took a seat at the table. "So, what's bothering you, buddy?" Carl asked sarcastically. "Don't tell me you're burnt out already," I laughed nervously before responding. Ha. No, man. Just been having trouble sleeping, that's all." I paused before continuing. "But while I've got you guys here, can I ask a question? What's the deal with Conference Room D?" I felt a sense of déjà vu as the atmosphere once again became tense at the mere mention of the mysterious room. Rachel and Carl exchanged knowing looks before Carl answered in a hushed tone. "You don't want to talk about Room D around here, Fuddy. Trust me." I frowned in confusion. "I don't understand," I replied. "Why's everyone so freaked out over a damn meeting room?" "I'm not freaked out," Carl shot back defensively. "There's some bad history with that room," Rachel offered as an explanation. "Mr. Hill doesn't like us talking about it in the office. He's been known to fire people for bringing it up." "Seriously?" I asked in astonishment. "Old Man Hill won't hear of it," Carl confirmed. "But hey," Rachel added with a smile, as she placed her hand on my wrist. "Why don't you come out with us for drinks after work? We can tell you the whole sorry tale at the bar." Rachel's invitation seemed genuine, although Carl didn't seem so keen, as perhaps he wanted the receptionist to himself that night. And I was reluctant at first, saying, "Thank you, but I don't think I'd be much company. I'm so zapped I'd probably fall asleep after one drink." "Oh, come on," Rachel said with a sly wink. "You'll get to bond with your colleagues and discover the office's dark secret. How can you pass up such a great opportunity?" "Yeah, man," Carl added, changing his tune as he slapped me playfully on the back. "Come out to play, it'll be fun." I guess I didn't need much persuasion because my next words were, "Sure, what the hell, count me in." A few hours later, the three of us were sitting together at a local bar, laughing and chatting as we downed cocktails. I temporarily forgot about my troubles whilst enjoying the company of my work colleagues, our inhibitions loosened by the alcohol. My attraction to Rachel only grew as the evening went on. I wished it were just the two of us, but I will admit that Carl was good company, telling amusing anecdotes as the drinks went down. We talked about a lot of things during our drinking session, but eventually the topic moved to conference room D. "It's a really sad story," Rachel said with a tear in her eye. "Yeah, tragic," Carl added with considerably less sympathy. Rachel ignored him and continued her account in between sips of her daiquiri. Stephen Banks was the boss before Mr. Hill. He ran the company for 10 years, but when the economic downturn hit, Delio was on the verge of bankruptcy. Mr. Banks did everything in his power but couldn't turn things around. I guess the poor man hit his breaking point. One Friday night he locked himself in room D and ended his life. They didn't find his body until Monday morning. The business recovered in time, but the tragedy was never forgotten, and Mr. Hill insisted that room D remained closed and locked up. "Wow," was the only response I could muster. It was a tragic story, to be sure, and I could understand why a dark shadow had been left over the office. But Carl scoffed before adding his 2 cents. "Sure, that's the official story if you choose to believe it," he said sarcastically. "Now, Carl, behave yourself," Rachel said playfully whilst shooting him a look. "Hey," Carl replied, defensively. "I'm just giving Danny Boy all the facts. He can make up his own mind." The sales rep shot me a wink. I played along, saying, "Well, Carl, why don't you enlighten me?" He smiled, took another gulp from his glass, and launched into his story. Sure, Banks was desperate, but he didn't kill himself. Rumor has it he became obsessed with the occult. Thought he could make a pact with the devil or some demon to turn the business around. On the night he died, Banks was trying to perform a satanic ritual, I guess. Didn't go as planned because he ended up dead, and that damn room has been cursed ever since. I felt my stomach drop after listening to Carl's account, and I guess it showed on my face. Carl had delivered the story with a straight face, but he could control himself no longer, bursting into laughter at my reaction. "Jesus, man," he exclaimed while slapping me on the back. "You really believe that load of crap?" He continued laughing as my face turned bright red with embarrassment. Once again, it was Rachel who came to my rescue, lightly punching Carl in the arm whilst chastising him. "Quit teasing him, Carl, it's not funny." The rep held his hands up defensively before replying. "I'm sorry, but he couldn't resist. But seriously, this whole business with that room, it's crazy. Total BS." I shook my head, taking a drink before replying nervously. "The thing is, guys, I've been having some weird dreams these last few nights. Dreams about room D." Carl snorted dismissively. "We've all had the nightmares," Rachel confirmed solemnly. "Even tough guy Carl." "I have a theory about that," Carl added. "I think of this as a shared delusion. This urban legend's been drummed into us for so long. Everyone who's worked in the office has heard the stories, and they're all scared witless by that damn room, but you know the only way to fight your fears is to confront them." "What do you mean?" Rachel asked in confusion. "I mean, we need to go into the room and prove it's all hokum," Carl said. He glanced at his watch before continuing. "Security will have gone home for the night, and you can get us into the office, Rachel." "Why, don't we do it tonight?" I almost spat out my drink at the suggestion. "You want to break into Delio's head office after hours?" I exclaimed. "Come on, man, don't be so dramatic," Carl responded with mockery. "We're Delio employees, and we're not planning on stealing anything, so it's hardly a break-in. Besides, no one will ever know we were there." There was a certain degree of excitement shared between the three of us when we entered the abandoned Delio office using Rachel's spare key. I felt like a naughty schoolboy breaking the rules, and I think the others shared my enthusiasm. We were all more than a little tipsy, and this only added to our boldness. The three of us sniggered like children as we crept past the reception and cubicles. The atmosphere only changed once we reached the annex. I can't explain what happened exactly, but I think all of us felt it, as we switched on the lights and crept down the dusty corridor. Looking back, I guess the fear I experienced was something primal. There was a voice inside my head screaming at me to walk away. I should have listened, but instead, I followed my companions as we made our way to the locked door of the conference room. Rachel hesitated, the door keys shaking in her hand. As she stood in front of the door, she turned towards me with fear now evident in her brown eyes. "I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't do this," she whispered. I didn't respond, but Carl did, tutting loudly before grabbing hold of the key. "For crying out loud, guys. What the hell's wrong with you both? We can't back down now." He was playing the tough guy. But I noticed how Carl was also trembling as he put the key in the lock and took a deep breath before turning it. The door slowly swung open, and we saw what lay inside for the first time. What struck me was how dark the room's interior was. Obviously, the lights were off, but the darkness was more than the absence of illumination. Still, I didn't have much time to dwell on this before Carl fumbled for the switch and turned on the lights. I felt better upon seeing the inside of the room because it seemed so ordinary. There was a long plywood desk in the middle of the carpeted floor, with chairs on either side. On the far wall facing us was a flat-screen television for video conferencing. The room had a musky smell and was obviously in need of vacuuming and dusting, but otherwise it was unremarkable. But when I looked down at the floor, I was shocked to see a dark stain on the carpet. "Oh my God," Rachel exclaimed. "That's a bloodstain." Carl laughed nervously. "Don't be so squeamish, let's go in." The sales rep led the way, while Rachel and I shared a worried look before entering. To this day, I don't know why we went along with it. Sure, Carl could be persuasive, but it was more than that. Like something or someone was pulling us inside. Stepping across the threshold was a significant moment, and we were all hit by an icy cold as soon as we entered. "It's freezing in here," I muttered. "Yeah, because the heating's off," said Carl. He had an answer for everything, but the confidence in his voice was faltering. "Come on, let's sit down and soak up the atmosphere," Carl added. We all sat around the table, maintaining a tense silence for a moment before Rachel asked a question through trembling lips. "What time is it?" I frowned, looking down at my watch before replying. "It's just coming up on midnight." "Why?" She looked me square in the eye, her face turning pale as she muttered, "Midnight. That's when Mr. Banks died." In the next moment, several things happened at once. Firstly, the meeting room door slammed shut even though none of us were near it. Rachel let out a panicked cry while Carl shouted, "What the hell?" We all jumped up from our chairs in shock. Carl made for the closed door, but a second later the lights went off, leaving us in total darkness. "Jesus," I cried out, fumbling for the desk in front of me. "Daniel, where are you?" Rachel called out. I stumbled clumsily towards her voice, but then the lights flickered before coming back on. And when our eyes adjusted, we discovered we were no longer alone. All hell broke loose when we saw him. Rachel screamed in terror whilst Carl collapsed onto the floor, his bravado gone as he cowered in the corner. I'm glad to say I showed more courage, lifting a chair in an effort to defend myself and my companions. But the being before us could not be defeated by physical means. The ghostly entity had appeared out of nowhere, emerging from the darkness to confront us. The man, if you can describe him as such, was sitting casually on the chair opposite us, dressed in an expensive but clearly soiled suit, with his tie undone and his shirt ruffled. But that's not what drew my attention and horror. His face was as pale as milk, his eyes black and lifeless, and worst of all, his throat was sliced open from ear to ear. "Oh God," Rachel screamed. "It's Mr. Banks! He's back!" The entity opened his bone-dry lips and spoke in a deep, inhuman voice, saying, "Actually, dear, I never left." "No," Carl cried, his previously cool composure melting away. "This isn't possible. You can't be real." The spirit of Mr. Banks didn't answer. Instead, he merely glared at Carl with his deadpan eyes. At this, the sales rep broke, abandoning us as he sprinted for the door and desperately tried to escape from the haunted room, only to find we were locked in. "I suggest you all calm down and take a seat," the spirit ordered. "We have matters to discuss." Why, I cannot say, but as terrified as we were, all three of us complied with the spirit's instructions, nervously sitting opposite him across the conference table whilst he coolly observed us. "It has been some time since anyone has dared enter my cursed prison," Banks announced. "Why have you three disturbed my slumber?" "We're sorry," Rachel blubbered. "We shouldn't have come. It was a mistake. Please let us go and we'll never disturb you again." Banks formed his crusty, colorless lips into what could be considered a smile before answering. "I'm sorry, my dear, but it's not up to me. We must all answer to him." He pointed towards the far wall with his bony finger, and, as if on command, the television screen burst to life, revealing a vision of inexplicable horror, set upon a background. Of burning crimson red was the shadow man I'd seen in my nightmares, a humanoid figure of pure black without any discernible physical features. He had no eyes, and yet I could tell he was staring straight at me. Worse, the monster could see through my outer skin, invading my psyche and infiltrating my very soul. I tried to move but couldn't. I wasn't even able to open my mouth to scream. I guess my companions were in the same horrifying predicament, because all three of us were frozen in our chairs, entirely at the mercy of this shadowy beast. Because the demon was more than just pixels on a screen. He was there on the far side of a porous membrane, apparently on the brink of breaking through. "I'm afraid I did something quite reckless all those years ago," Banks explained solemnly, as we three remained trapped in our seats. In my desperation, I opened a portal to his world, leading the beast straight to this little room. Thankfully, he cannot leave here, and I remain as a gatekeeper of sorts, my soul doomed to dwell between these four walls until Judgment Day. Conference. Room D is kept under lock and key for good reason, because anyone who enters is at the mercy of the beast. "You shouldn't have come here." His statement was an obvious one. We'd been very foolish, ignoring all warnings and placing ourselves in extreme danger. But Banks wasn't quite finished. Believe it or not, the beast is not entirely unreasonable. He is willing to forgive transgressions up to a point. But there is a price to pay. 3 of you entered, but only 2 can leave. The choice is yours. At that moment, we regained some level of control over our bodies. I was able to turn my head and lift my arm, and instinctively, I reached out to Rachel and took her hand. She met my gaze and squeezed my hand, and in that moment, we made our joint decision. "Very well," Banks said firmly. "Leave now, both of you, and don't look back." We stood up together, our feet shaking, and slowly walked hand in hand towards the door, which was now wide open. I didn't want to look back, but Carl shouted after us in fury and terror. "No! Come back! You can't leave me here!" Carl had regained control of his vocal cords but couldn't move from his seat. I made the mistake of looking into his wide eyes and felt a pang of guilt, which made me pause. But Rachel pulled me forward, whispering in my ear, "He got us into this, Daniel. There's no other way." And I knew she was right, so I pulled myself away and continued towards the exit. The last vision I had inside that room was horrifying, as the shadowy beast exited the screen and tore forward, attacking a screaming Carl with his dark form. Carl's tie tightened around his throat, cutting off his airflow and slowly throttling him. That was the last thing I saw, as we retreated out into the hallway and the door slammed shut behind us. We reported the incident straight away, but it was already too late. Carl was dead by the time the paramedics arrived. There was CCTV footage of the 3 of us entering the office together, but no coverage of the events in Conference Room D. The cops questioned Rachel and me about Carl's death, but there was no evidence of foul play, and so we were both released without charge. We didn't get off entirely, however, as Mr. Hill fired both of us without hesitation. I can't say I blamed him. Rachel and I have met up a few times since the incident. We alone know the truth of what happened that night, but our relationship will never recover, and we'll both carry the guilt to our graves. I often think of Conference Room D as the shadowy beast continues to haunt my nightmares. I fear Carl is still trapped in there, his soul forever stuck between this world and the next. Sadly, I can't turn back the clock, but I pray that no one repeats our fatal mistake and the door to Room D remains firmly locked. Children of the storm. The storm had come down from the north without warning, a black wall of cloud that swallowed the stars and smothered the sea in darkness. Wind clawed at the cliffs with wild, shrieking hands, and the lighthouse stood. Against it all, a stoic, crumbling finger of stone lashed by rain and spray. Inside, Donovan Kimball slept fitfully beneath a heavy quilt, one arm flung over his eyes to block the occasional flicker of lightning that broke through the warped shutters. He had not meant to stay long when he first took the job. The ad in the paper had promised solitude and steady pay, enough, he thought, to settle his mother's debts and perhaps afford better care for Margaret before the cancer claimed her completely. Donovan had arrived 6 months ago with 2 battered suitcases and a heart hollowed out by desperation. He had seen the old trunk in the corner of the sitting room, its iron clasps rusted shut, and heard the local councilman mumble something about records and old instructions. But there had been so much to do: repairs to the living quarters, maintenance on the corroded gears, and Donovan had pushed thoughts of dusty journals and sailor superstitions aside. The lighthouse itself had an unsettling presence even on clear days. Its walls groaned in the heat, and its iron stairs shuddered underfoot. But Donovan, a practical man by necessity, had long since learned to ignore the quirks of old structures. Tonight, however, as the gale battered the coastline and waves smashed themselves against the rocks below, there was an edge to the place he could not explain away. At precisely 3 minutes past midnight, Donovan woke to a sound that should not have existed. Knock, knock, knock. He sat up, blinking into the darkness. For a moment, he thought it had been a dream, some phantom noise stitched together by a restless mind. Then it came again, louder this time, knock, 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 against the heavy oak door at the base of the tower. Donovan swung his legs out from under the quilt, wincing as the cold floorboards bit into his bare feet. He pulled on his boots without bothering to lace them and reached for the lantern perched on the bedside table. The flame inside shivered and leaned with every gust that pressed against the walls. The spiral staircase moaned under his weight as he descended, the lantern casting a swinging circle of light ahead of him. Shadows bled from the corners where the stonework met the wooden supports, and the air smelled faintly of salt and old smoke. Donovan tightened his grip on the lantern handle and muttered a curse under his breath. At the bottom of the stairs, he paused, listening. The storm roared around the lighthouse, but beneath it, he thought he heard something else. The faint, persistent tapping against the door. Not frantic, not desperate, merely insistent, as if whatever waited outside had infinite patience. He crossed the room, his boots thudding against the uneven floor, and laid his free hand on the iron latch. For a moment he hesitated, the old instincts of a dock worker stirring in his mind. Never open a door at night, especially not during a storm. But reason quickly overruled superstition. If it was a sailor in distress or some poor soul washed ashore, Donovan could not in good conscience leave them to die. He lifted the latch and pulled the door open against the howling wind. The beam from his lantern pierced the darkness, illuminating a scene of pure desolation. Rain slashed sideways across the threshold. The rocky path leading down to the beach was slick with runoff, and beyond it, the sea seethed. No figure stood on the doorstep. No shadow moved along the path. Donovan stepped outside for a moment, raising the lantern higher. Its light revealed nothing but stones and crashing surf. No footprints marked the mud at his feet. No voice called out from the blackness. Frowning, he retreated inside and closed the door firmly, sliding the iron bolt back into place with a dull scrape. He stood there for a moment longer, listening to the wind scream against the stone and wood, before finally turning away. Perhaps it had been nothing. Perhaps the storm had loosened a shutter somewhere or thrown a piece of debris against the door. The old mind, burdened by worry and lack of sleep, often heard what it expected to hear. Still, as Donovan climbed back up the stairs to his small cold bed, he could not shake the feeling that something unseen had been waiting just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow. Something that knew he had opened the door. Something that had been invited in. Part 2. Sleep did not come easily after Donovan climbed back under the quilt. The storm battered the lighthouse with relentless fury, rattling the windows in their frames and sending occasional shudders through the stone walls. He lay with his eyes closed, the sound of the wind rising and falling in waves, but rest remained, elusive. Every time he drifted toward unconsciousness, he thought he heard the faint memory of that knock, ghosting through the whine of the storm. He told himself it was nerves, nothing more. The mind could weave strange illusions when pressed by exhaustion and isolation. The lighthouse had always been an eerie place, perched on the edge of the world like a long-forgotten sentinel. He had known that when he accepted the posting. Still, when the second knock came, there was no mistaking it. Knock, knock, knock. It was no longer a request for shelter. It was a summons. This time, the sound carried a weight that the first had not. It rang sharply through the tower's hollow spaces, like a bell. Donovan sat bolt upright and swung his legs to the floor again, pulling his boots on with shaking hands. The lantern sat cold and dark on the bedside table. In his hurry, he had forgotten to refill it earlier. Cursing under his breath, he grabbed the matches and coaxed the flame back to life, shielding it carefully from the gusts leaking through the warped window panes. The staircase seemed longer on the second ascent. The shadows felt thicker and more aggressive, creeping up the walls and coiling in the corners. Donovan kept his eyes fixed ahead, unwilling to glance over his shoulder, though every instinct in him screamed that something followed just beyond the reach of the light. At the base of the stairs, he hesitated. The door stood before him, the solid oak boards slick with moisture, trembling slightly on their hinges as the storm beat against it. For several long moments, Donovan remained frozen, weighing his options. Ignoring the knock was tempting, locking the bolt and retreating upstairs until daylight. However, another sound reached him then, softer, but infinitely more troubling. Whimper. It was faint, nearly swallowed by the howl of the wind, but it came again unmistakably. A high, thin cry of distress, like that of a wounded animal or a child. Grinding his teeth against a surge of unease, Donovan drew back the latch and hauled the door open. At first, he saw nothing but the rain. It battered the threshold in thick sheets, turning the worn stones slick and treacherous. His lantern's flickering beam revealed no figure standing in the deluge. No shape moved beyond the reach of the light. But when he lowered his gaze, he found it. A bundle lay on the doorstep, wrapped tightly in a sheet of oilskin and bound with what looked like fishing twine. It was no larger than a sack of flour, but it shifted slightly as he watched, shuddering in a way that spoke of something alive, or at least once alive, within. The smell struck him next, salt and rot, like the shoreline after a red tide. Donovan fought the urge to recoil. Every rational thought in his mind screamed for him to leave it where it lay, to close the door, bolt it shut, and let the sea reclaim whatever horror it had coughed up onto his doorstep. But the whimper came, again, this time clearly emanating from the bundle itself. Cursing under his breath, Donovan stepped forward. He crouched low, careful not to let the lantern's flame be extinguished by the gusting rain, and reached for the parcel. The oilskin was soaked through and slimy under his fingers. The bundle squirmed weakly as he lifted it, issuing a sound, somewhere between a sob and a gurgle. The weight surprised him. It was heavier than it looked, dense and oddly warm despite the chill. With the bundle cradled awkwardly in one arm and the lantern in the other, Donovan staggered back inside. He kicked the door shut behind him and threw the bolt, its solid click providing only a hollow comfort. Standing in the center of the sitting room, water pooling around his boots, Donovan looked down at the shivering mass in his arms. His gut twisted painfully, torn between dread and an almost paternal instinct to protect. He set the bundle gently on the scarred kitchen table. It writhed weakly against the bindings, emitting a pitiful keening sound that raised the hair on the back of his neck. For a long moment, Donovan simply stood there, watching it. The storm raged outside, pounding against the stone walls as if demanding entrance. Inside, the only sound was the soft, labored breathing of the thing wrapped in oilskin. He would unwrap it. He would find out what the sea had delivered to his door, but he would not be able to pretend he did not know, deep down, that nothing good ever came knocking in the heart of a storm. The knife sat on a hook above the kitchen counter, its wooden handle worn smooth by years of use. Donovan retrieved it with steady hands, though his stomach churned with unease. The bundle on the table twitched faintly, as though responding to his movements. Its oilskin wrapping had begun to loosen at the edges, leaking brackish water across the wood. Donovan approached the table, lantern in hand. He set the light down carefully, angling it to cast the widest glow. Restless shadows pooled beyond the edges of the room. Outside, the storm battered the lighthouse with renewed fury, but inside, the only sounds were the drip of water onto the floorboards and the labored breathing from within the bundle. He pressed the tip of the knife to the oilskin, hesitating. There was still time to reconsider, to bundle the thing back into the storm and let the sea reclaim whatever it had offered. Yet some stubborn instinct drove him forward, a duty to know, to confront the unknown rather than flee from it. With a conscious motion, Donovan sliced through the bindings. The twine snapped under the blade and the oilskin parted with a wet sigh. He peeled it back, layer by layer, revealing the thing hidden within. At first, he thought it was a child. The shape was right. Small limbs curled in on themselves, a head too large for the spindly body. But as he leaned closer, the details grew wrong. The skin was translucent, stretched thin over delicate bones and networks of faintly pulsing veins. Dark, lidless eyes stared up at him, glassy and unblinking, reflecting the lantern light in wide, endless pools. Gills flared and fluttered along the sides of its neck, gasping for breath in the salty air. The creature shuddered weakly, emitting a sound halfway between a sigh and a sob. Donovan recoiled a step before catching himself. His first instinct, raw and primal, screamed at him to destroy the thing, to expel it from his home before it brought ruin down upon him. He tightened his grip on the knife, the handle slick against his palm. Yet the creature made no move to harm him. It lay helpless, on the table, shivering, its thin chest rising and falling with shallow, ragged breaths. It was suffering. Whatever it was alive, and it was suffering. An image rose unbidden in Donovan's mind. Margaret, frail and sunken into the narrow hospital bed, her hand trembling in his when she had last spoken. "Do not turn away from those who need you," she had whispered. "Even when you are afraid." Donovan cursed softly under his breath and set the knife down. He could not kill it. Whatever instincts cried out against the thing's presence, whatever dark memories stirred at the edges of his mind, he could not stand by and let it die. He retrieved a woolen blanket from the cupboard and wrapped the creature carefully. Its skin felt clammy and oddly slick beneath his fingers, like something half-formed, but it did not resist. It only whimpered once, a pitiful, broken sound that made his throat tighten. He placed the wrapped creature near the iron stove, adjusting the vents to coax out more heat. The flames inside guttered but then flared brighter, casting warm light across the room. The creature curled tighter into the blanket, visibly relaxing under the rising warmth. Donovan watched it for a long moment, tension slowly bleeding from his shoulders. As he stood there, the edge of his gaze caught something carved into the floorboards near the base of the stove. He knelt, brushing aside dust and grime with the edge of his sleeve, revealing a series of faint symbols, spirals interlocked, with jagged lines forming a sigil he did not recognize. The marks had been worn almost smooth by years of footsteps, but they remained faintly visible, an old forgotten protection, perhaps. He straightened slowly, unease blooming anew in his chest. The journals, the trunk he had ignored. Donovan glanced toward the sitting room where the battered trunk lay slumped against the wall, its iron clasp still rusted shut. He had dismissed it when he arrived, too focused on survival to bother with superstition and sailors' tales. Now, in the flickering light of the stove, he wondered what warnings he might have missed. The creature stirred again, drawing his attention back to the present, its black eyes fixed on him impossibly deep, holding a flicker of something that felt too knowing to belong to a beast. Donovan found himself unable to look away, trapped in that unblinking gaze. He tore his eyes free and stepped back, shaking his head. His mind was playing tricks on him. It had to be. Exhaustion, stress, and isolation were powerful forces. He would tend to the creature tonight and keep it alive if he could. In the morning, he would hike to town and send a message to the mainland. Let someone wiser and better equipped deal with whatever the storm had delivered to his doorstep. For now, the lighthouse stood firm against the raging dark, its beams slicing across the seething sea. And Donovan Kimball stood watch, unaware that the door he had opened would never again be closed. The storm did not lessen as the night dragged on. If anything, it deepened, pressing against the lighthouse walls with a force that seemed almost personal. Rain battered the windows in frantic bursts, and the tower groaned under the constant assault of the wind. Donovan sat in the kitchen with the bundle still nestled near the stove, but his gaze kept drifting toward the battered trunk resting against the far wall. He had spent the past hour tending to the creature, drying its clammy skin with a threadbare towel and coaxing weak sips of water past its thin lips. Each act of kindness unsettled him further, gnawing at the foundation of his instincts. The creature's black eyes never closed, never blinked. They followed his every movement with a quiet, unsettling intensity. At last, when he could bear the weight of that stare no longer, Donovan rose and crossed the room to the trunk. The iron clasps had rusted shut, but a few sharp blows from the handle of the knife were enough to jar them loose. The lid creaked open, releasing a puff of musty air thick with the scent of salt, mildew, and old paper. Donovan coughed and waved the cloud aside, squinting into the gloom. Inside, a tangle of leather-bound journals, brittle maps, and small, unfamiliar relics lay scattered. Atop the pile rested a ledger, its cover cracked and curling at the edges. Donovan lifted it free, brushing off a film of dust. The first page bore the names of the lighthouse's previous keepers, each one followed by dates, sometimes spanning decades, sometimes only a few months. Beside some entries, crude notes had been scrawled: lost to the sea, taken in the storm, service completed. Donovan flipped through the ledger, the pages growing more chaotic as he progressed. Early entries detailed maintenance schedules and supply orders. Later ones darkened, filled with terse, hurried handwriting that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting dread. One entry, penned in a spidery hand nearly illegible with haste, caught his eye. The barrier weakens. Each generation swears the oath anew, lest the children find a way ashore. Keep the light burning, perform the offerings, renew the wards. Without vigilance, the sea will claim what we stole. The sea never forgot, and neither did what slept beneath it. Donovan's mouth went dry. He set the ledger aside and pulled another volume from the trunk, this one smaller and bound in stained, water-warped leather. Inside, sketches depicted symbols eerily similar to those carved into the floor near the stove. Spirals and jagged lines intertwined with crude depictions of figures kneeling before the sea, offering strange bundles wrapped in cloth. Beneath one illustration, a single word had been etched in forceful strokes: packed. Donovan dropped the journal onto the floorboards, recoiling as if burned. The lighthouse had never been simply a beacon for sailors. It had been a bulwark, a seal against something older and darker than the sea itself. Every keeper before him had known and had agreed to participate in the maintenance of that barrier. Sacrifices had been made, rituals performed, secrets kept. No one had told Donovan when he signed the employment contract. No mention had been made of blood debts or ancient promises. He had inherited the responsibility unknowingly, through desperation and ignorance. He turned back toward the kitchen. The creature remained by the stove, bundled tightly, breathing in shallow gasps. The firelight danced across its translucent skin, illuminating faint tracings of veins that throbbed with each fragile heartbeat. It looked vulnerable, almost pitiful. Yet Donovan could no longer ignore the truth. By opening the door and taking the bundle inside, he had broken whatever fragile protection remained. Donovan rubbed a hand across his face, feeling the weight of exhaustion and fear settle deeper into his bones. His thoughts churned, each revelation dragging him further from the solid ground of reason and into a churning sea of uncertainty. A low, hollow sound drew his attention. At first he thought it was the storm again, Another howl of wind surging against the tower. But as he listened, he realized it came from beneath the floor, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the stones. He knelt quickly, pressing his ear against the cold boards. The hum resolved itself into voices distant and murmuring, as though an unseen congregation gathered beneath the lighthouse foundation. He could not make out the words, but the cadence chilled him. It was a chant, ancient and slow, rising and falling with a rhythm that felt both alien and sickeningly familiar. Donovan scrambled to his feet. The lantern flickered violently on the table. Shadows twisted across the walls, warping into grotesque shapes that vanished when he looked at them directly. The storm outside no longer seemed natural. It was something else now, a living, seething entity pressing in against the thin walls of the lighthouse, demanding access. Donovan staggered back toward the trunk, frantically searching through the pile. His hands closed around a stone, black, smooth, and faintly warm to the touch. Strange sigils had been etched into its surface, though the language was unfamiliar. The relics of those who had fought this battle before him lay at his feet, abandoned by men who had either fled or failed. He glanced back at the creature still curled near the stove and felt a surge of helpless rage. This had never been a job. It had been a sentence. And by taking the keys and lighting the lamp 6 months ago, Donovan Kimball had unknowingly chained himself to a war that no man could win. The first crack appeared in the lantern's glass. Donovan watched in helpless horror as the flame inside guttered and died, leaving the kitchen steeped in a suffocating gloom. The shadows, once restrained to the corners of the room, swelled outward, coating the walls and ceiling in darkness, their every movement synchronized with the distant chanting beneath the floor. He stumbled back and braced himself against the table. His hands, slick with sweat, slipped across the wood before he found his footing. He reached for the second lantern kept on the shelf by the stairs, fumbling with the matches. It took several tries before the flame caught, sputtering weakly to life. The new light revealed that the creature had shifted. It no longer lay huddled in its blanket, but had risen onto thin, trembling limbs. Its black, glassy eyes locked onto Donovan with a gaze that froze him where he stood. No helpless whimper passed its lips now. Instead, it tilted its head at an unnatural angle, regarding him with a patience that felt ancient and calculating. New sound filtered through the battered walls, a low, dragging scrape along the outer stones of the lighthouse. Donovan turned toward the nearest window and peered into the storm. Figures pressed against the glass. At first he could not distinguish them from the rain and mist, but as lightning split the sky, their forms sharpened into terrible clarity. Dozens of figures swayed outside the tower, clad in the tattered remnants of sailors' garb. Faces bloated and warped by the sea peered inward with hollow, accusing eyes. Barnacles clung to their rotted flesh, and seaweed streamed from their mouths like grotesque tongues. The watchers had arrived. The light atop the tower, the very heart of the lighthouse, flickered visibly through the storm, its steady pulse faltering, like a dying heartbeat. Donovan knew instinctively that once the beam failed, there would be nothing left to hold the darkness at bay. The walls would crumble. The foundation would fail. The storm would not merely destroy the lighthouse, but would sweep beyond it, carrying its terrible cargo inland. He faced the creature again, his mind racing. Somewhere deep inside, the truth solidified. The creature was no innocent victim. It was the key, the wedge that had been placed within the lighthouse to crack its defenses. By allowing it entry, Donovan had sealed the tower's fate. Yet perhaps if he acted swiftly enough, he could undo the damage. Perhaps the sea would take back its child, and the breach could be repaired before the final collapse. He grabbed the blanket, scooping the creature up in one motion. It did not resist. It merely watched him with unblinking eyes, as if it had known all along what must come. Its skin, cold and clammy against his arms, sent a deep shiver through him. Donovan kicked the door open with his boot, bracing himself against the howling wind that tore at his coat and lashed his face with icy needles of rain. He staggered out onto the slick path, clutching the bundled creature tightly against his chest. The watchers turned as one. Their eyeless faces lifted toward him, and a chorus of low, mournful cries rose above the storm's roar. Some began to move, their rotted limbs dragging across the ground as they lurched toward him with dreadful purpose. Donovan forced his legs to move, slipping and stumbling along the broken stones that led to the cliff's edge. The path, already treacherous in calm weather, had become a death trap in the storm. He fell once, his knee striking the sharp edge of a rock, but he ignored the burst of pain and staggered back to his feet. The cliff loomed ahead, its jagged edge obscured by the curtain of rain. Beyond it, the sea boiled and heaved, frothing with unnatural violence. Waves the size of houses battered the rocks below, sending spray high into the air. Donovan reached the precipice and held the creature, out over the abyss. For a moment he hesitated. The creature stared up at him, its expression serene. A flash of memory seared across his mind. Margaret's frail hand in his, her whispered plea never to abandon those in need. He tightened his grip on the blanket, steeling his heart against the surge of doubt. With a hoarse cry, he hurled the bundle into the churning sea. The creature vanished into the darkness below without a sound. For a breathless moment, the world stood still. The light atop the tower flared suddenly, burning with a fierce, desperate brilliance. The watchers recoiled, shrieking, their forms dissolving into mist that the wind carried out over the water. The chanting beneath the lighthouse ceased, cut off as though a blade had severed it. Donovan staggered back from the cliff, chest heaving, blood pounding in his ears. He had done it. He had acted. He had chosen. But in the hollow between heartbeats, Donovan felt no true relief, only a terrible, echoing silence from the deep. Donovan stumbled backward from the cliff's edge, his breath tearing in and out of his lungs with desperate force. The wind, still vicious, seemed somehow less charged now, stripped of the malevolent intelligence that had pressed against the lighthouse walls. Overhead, the clouds churned and cracked apart, revealing thin slashes of pale, reluctant stars. The beam of the lighthouse burned with renewed strength, slicing cleanly through the night in long, unwavering sweeps. The great lens atop the tower spun in its housing, casting its protective gaze far out over the dark, heaving waters. Donovan recoiled at the sight. Against all odds, the light still stood. He had preserved it. He turned his gaze back to the sea. The watchers had receded. Their bloated, tattered forms dissolved into the mist, leaving behind only shredded remnants of clothing and a few swirling eddies of foam along the rocks. The voices that had murmured beneath the lighthouse, the ancient chant that had gnawed at his sanity, had fallen silent. For the first time that night, the oppressive weight that had hung over the world seemed to lift, and Donovan allowed himself to believe that he had averted disaster. A cold rain continued to fall, but without the same ferocity. It pattered against the stones with a natural cadence rather than the earlier frenzy. The wind, though still sharp, no longer howled with that strange human edge. The world, battered and broken, had endured. Donovan pressed a hand against his aching ribs, feeling the deep bruises from his fall along the path. Pain radiated through his side and down his leg, but he welcomed it. Pain meant survival. Pain meant that he still had a body to feel anything at all. With stiff movements, he began the slow, laborious climb back toward the lighthouse. The path was treacherous underfoot, slick with mud and rain, but Donovan no longer cared. Each step, though grueling, brought him closer to the battered tower, to shelter, to safety, to the familiar warmth of the stove, and the comforting solidity of stone walls between himself and the raging world beyond. He reached the lighthouse door and braced himself against the frame, drawing in slow breaths in an attempt to steady his shaking hands. His heart raced, but a deeper, quieter part of him had begun to hope. Margaret's voice echoed faintly in his memory, full of pride and relief. "You did what you had to do. You stood your ground." Donovan smiled grimly and pushed open the door. Inside, the kitchen remained much as he had left it. The second lantern still flickered atop the table, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the worn floorboards. The stove crackled softly, emitting waves of heat that chased away the damp chill. For a few blessed moments, it was easy to believe that the nightmare had passed. that normalcy, whatever remained of it, might be restored. Yet something gnawed at the edges of his awareness. Donovan paused on the threshold, frowning. The air inside the lighthouse felt heavier than it should have, despite the retreat of the storm. A faint, unpleasant odor clung to the walls, not the sharp tang of sea salt or smoke, but something deeper, more primal. It reminded him of earth, turned over in a graveyard after a torrential rain, of rot awakened by disruption. He closed the door carefully behind him and dropped the iron bolt into place. The lighthouse creaked and settled around him, the ancient stones flexing under the weight of the wind. Donovan crossed to the trunk once more, intending to retrieve another warding relic to reinforce whatever fragile defenses he could muster before morning. As he knelt, searching through the jumbled contents, another flicker of unease gripped him. The ground beneath his boots vibrated almost imperceptibly, a low, pulsing tremor that grew stronger with each passing second. Donovan rose slowly and crossed to the nearest window, peering out into the darkness beyond. Far below, along the rocky shore where the creature had fallen, the sea no longer churned aimlessly. A great shadow moved beneath the surface, larger than any ship. The ocean, vast and uncaring, bore something toward the land. A new storm gathered on the horizon, blacker and more sinister than the last. Donovan swallowed hard, dread hollowing out his chest. The battle he had fought was not the war. It had only been the beginning. Donovan stood frozen at the window, unable to tear his gaze from the black shape that churned beneath the surface of the sea. It was vast and ancient beyond comprehension, and it moved with a terrible grace, the way a continent might shift unseen in the depths, dragging the tides in its wake. Even from this distance, he could feel it. The newly gathered storm roiled. Above it, tendrils of cloud reaching down like groping fingers. Lightning flickered within the churning mass, illuminating glimpses of impossible shapes that writhed and twisted, things with too many limbs and eyes that swallowed the light. The ocean, once wild and reckless, now moved with the order of something summoned, obedient to a will older than the land itself. Donovan backed away from the window, legs trembling beneath him. The journals had warned him, he realized too late. They had whispered in brittle, fading ink. Once a child of the storm crosses your threshold, the old bonds are broken. By taking the bundle inside, he had not merely endangered the lighthouse. He had cracked the foundation that held the ancient pact in place. His desperate act of mercy, however noble, had been exactly what the sea had waited for. The creature had not been a survivor or a refugee. It had been the key. The lighthouse beam, though still spinning, no longer pierced the darkness as it once had. Its light struck the storm and dissolved into it, swallowed without reflection or resistance. The beacon, like a voice shouting into a void too deep to answer, grew fainter with every sweep. Far beyond the cliff's edge, along the ruined shoreline, Donovan could see new shapes rising from the surf, forms that moved upright but slithered, and twisted in ways no human body could endure. Limbs ended in finned stumps, faces stretched into slack amphibian sneers. They poured out from the sea in numbers too great to count. The watchers had only been the first. A low vibration rattled the stones underfoot, spreading outward in widening circles. It carried with it a sound, deep and resonant, that vibrated in Donovan's teeth and bones. It was not a voice, yet it spoke all the same, a language made of gravity and inevitability, too old for human minds to name. He stumbled toward the kitchen table, clutching at it for support. The second lantern still burned there, its tiny flame struggling against the gloom. It sputtered as if the very air sought to smother the light and flared weakly, before finally steadying. Donovan sagged into the chair nearest the stove, his arms hanging limp at his sides. He knew now that no message would reach the mainland in time. No ship would brave the waves boiling beyond the cliffs. No townsperson would wake before the sky fell. His thoughts splintered into fragments. Margaret's frail smile in her hospital bed, the warmth of the woolen blanket wrapped around the creature, The steady ticking of the lighthouse gears in better days. All of it, would be swept away. The towns and cities inland, still sleeping under calm, starless skies, would never know the reason why their world ended in silence and flood. Outside, the sea rose higher, and in the deep places, the first true children stirred. The storm began to sing, a deep, endless note that wound itself around the bones of the world. Donovan closed his eyes and bowed his head. The children of the storm had come home at last, and behind them, something older, something hungrier, reached for the world that had forgotten its name.